Let me bring in former U.S. Attorney and former senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg. Is that how you read this, Chuck?
It is. I think Lisa has the legal part of it precisely right, Chris. I will say, look, Judge Merchan's decision was fraught. Someone's going to be unhappy no matter what he does. He's doing what judges do all the time around the country in state and federal courts. He's balancing competing interests. And this is not an easy one, and it is rather unprecedented. And so, look, I think on balance, he has it right.
Can I just ask you, though,
yeah.
Is it fraught legally or is it fraught because of the politics surrounding it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Chris. I would say more so politically and less so legally. I think the law is pretty clear. Once you're convicted by a jury of felonies, you get sentenced, and that happens all the time. But here you have the rather unique situation of the person who is to be sentenced running for president as a major party candidate. And so Judge Merchan is balancing those competing interests. And I think, as he probably sees it, if he does anything to interfere in the election, then he's done something wrong. And so he can wait. The verdict doesn't go away. Mr. Trump presumably will still be sentenced. It's simply after the election rather than before. And when you balance those interests, that makes sense to me, Chris.
So let me ask you what happens then between now and November 12th. What will both sides be doing, Chuck?
Well, I imagine the Trump team will be trying to find ways to postpone or indefinitely or to get rid of the case entirely. I mean, that's been their strategy, not just delay, but to make the darn thing go away. Prosecutors will defend against that, of course, and they'll prepare for sentencing, as they always do. So I don't know that strategies on either side change in meaningful ways, Chris.
I want to bring in Diane Kiesel, a former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney and retired New York City criminal court judge. It's good to see you again. I think it would be hard to argue against what Chuck said, that this was always going to be a fraught decision. Anything that deals with a presidential election is both unprecedented and therefore fraught. But how complex do you think this was, and what do you think of the decision that he made?
Well, I agree with Chuck. There's nothing fraught about this legally. This happens all the time. Defendants get convicted. They file 330 motions. Those motions either get granted or denied. The defendant gets sentenced. And if the defendant's still unhappy, then he can file a 440 motion, which is essentially a post-sentence motion. The only thing that was ever fraught here was the politics. And I think Judge Merchan really was between a rock and a hard place. If he sentenced him now, he'd look as if he were trying to influence the election in a negative manner. If he puts it over till after the election, he looks as if, to some people perhaps, that he's doing a favor. The problem, as I see it, though, is, what's going to happen after the election? It's going to be more of the same. If Mr. Trump wins the election, it's going to be, well, I can't be sentenced now. I'm working on a transition team. I'm too busy. I don't know what happens if he doesn't get convicted. I guess, elected. I guess that makes it easier for Judge Merchan. Frankly, the easiest thing for Judge Merchan would have been to simply sentence him and let the appellate division worry about it. But I do think the judge, who is known to be fair, was trying to be fair.
I want to go back to Vaughn Hilliard. And Vaughn, I understand we are hearing from Team Trump.
Yeah, we just got an initial statement here from one of the spokespersons for the Trump campaign. Just read it to you here. Quote, "There should be no sentencing in the Manhattan District Attorney's election interference witch hunt, as mandated by the United States Supreme Court. This case, along with all of the other Harris-Biden hoaxes, should be dismissed." It's Stephen Chung, spokesman for the Trump campaign's initial statement. Of course, this is what Lisa is getting at here, is the fact that we are waiting for Judge Merchan to also decide the merits of the Trump team's appeal to Judge Merchan to all but nullify the decision of the jury back in May on the grounds that some of the evidence that was admitted was before the U.S. Supreme Court's immunity decision, which granted some protections to Donald Trump in his role as president over what could be or could not be admissible. Of course, it was the prosecution from District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office, which ferociously pushed back in suggesting that it was de minimis, that the evidence that would potentially have not been shown before the jury was minimal in terms of what was overwhelming evidence that would have been admissible, including the actual testimony of the witnesses who took the stand. And so, of course, here, Donald Trump is continued to suggest that all of the cases, not just this one, should be dismissed. Of course, he has referenced that Judge Cannon in Florida is the only judge who has so far done her job with ethics, which, of course, Judge Cannon, who is not throwing out that case on the grounds of the immunity decision, but on the grounds that she considered it to have been a special counsel that was not rightfully appointed by the district attorney general or by the attorney general here. And so this is for the Trump campaign, I think, just a little bit of an insight into what we should hear from Donald Trump here in North Carolina today, in Wisconsin tomorrow on the trail, as he continues to make the case nationally and publicly, like he did when he was on the stage in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention, that these cases should not be brought at all, not only on the substance, but also under the Supreme Court's immunity decision, which we will wait to hear from Judge Merchan as it applies to this specific case.
I have another question for you, Vaughn, but before I go to it, can you please read that very brief statement again?
Quote, there should be no sentencing in the Manhattan DA's election interference witch hunt. As mandated by the United States Supreme Court, this case, along with all of the other Harris-Biden hoaxes, should be dismissed.
So they see this as an opportunity to continue what their arguments have been all along, that none of these cases are legitimate, and not to say, of course we got to win because we're right. There was none of that. There was none of the, this is the argument we made, whether or not this is exactly what Juan Merchan said. The judge agrees with us. This is clearly fighting mode.
A fighting mode, and also an effort to, let's be very frank, distort, right? I think that this particular statement here from Stephen Chung could very well have merits. We will wait to hear from Judge Merchan, at least as it applies to the hush money payment case, about whether there was enough evidence that he finds should not have been admitted under the Supreme Court's decision. At the same time, when I say distort, Donald Trump has repeatedly distorted the not only Judge Cannon's decision in the classified documents case. He said it was exoneration, right? That's what we've heard in the impeachment. And he often uses the word exoneration to suggest that somehow these judges are finding that he did not actually do any wrongdoing. And for anybody that may not be listening to right-wing provocative media that is Trump-aligned, or reading to the second and third paragraph of a story, I think that Trump's words hold great weight, because we often, after traveling on the campaign trail, hear his lines parroted by a swath of his supporters here. And so I think that, you know, including the fact that people make the case that the Supreme Court granted him immunity and that none of these cases should be brought before him. Of course, again, this is going to come down to likes of Judge Merchan and Judge Chutkan, who are, based off of how the U.S. justice system works, going to give the defendants' attorneys, Donald Trump's attorneys, their due chance to present in briefings and in hearings what they believe is protected from the rights of Donald Trump as being the former president from the immunity decision here. And so this is part of the justice system that sometimes gets, again, I'll use the word distorted by Donald Trump, when by and large this is absolutely going through the process that those who, like Chuck and Lisa, have actually operated through, and other reporters like ourselves have watched transpire. Donald Trump is getting his due course in the court of law, and clearly Judge Merchan, who he has continually suggested has political motives, could have very well, if he had desired, kept the September 18th sentencing on the books, but he chose not to. Instead, he's pushing it back after the election, and in his decision there, even noting so that the American public would not distort what ultimately his decision was as part of the memo.